This is the Solid Signal Podcast for the week of December 4th, 2023. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you're noticing that you're not seeing my face this week. And I'll give you two reasons. First of all, some of the comments were a little bit harsh. And while, I got a pretty thick skin and I know this is the internet, just no reason to have that kind of thing. So thank you very much for those of you who felt like that was what you needed to do. Second of all, and probably more important, the addition of live video did not really change my number of YouTube views. I still get many more views through other podcasting platforms, which are audio only. So I decided to go back to audio only. It's easier to edit and it comes out, I think, a little bit smoother. So let's get started. The title of this particular podcast is Back to Basics. Why Back to Basics? I wanted to start once again by talking a little bit about the difference between cable TV and satellite TV, because there's more to it than you would think. Obviously, the biggest difference is that cable TV comes in on a wire, which is tied to fiber that's going throughout your city, and satellite TV comes from the sky. That's pretty much the definition of it. But there's a lot more to it than that. Cable television comes to your house through something called a local head end. There's a facility somewhere in your city that has a bunch of satellite dishes and a bunch of antennas, and it pulls in all this programming, and it pulls in only the programming that's needed for your local area. On the other hand, there's really just one broadcast facility for DirecTV, and it's all the stuff comes into this big facility. Well, there are two, but that's not really the point. There are these broadcast centers that control what's coming in and then beam stuff up to the satellite where it goes out to the entire country. This ends up being a lot more complex because they don't just need the local channels for your area, they need the local channels for everybody's area. And there are also a bunch of real legal distinctions that I've recently been reminded of when it comes to cable TV versus satellite. Cable TV is governed by a set of laws that are designed to help local channels prosper, while on the other hand, the laws governing satellite TV are a little bit more balanced. They're designed to help satellite companies get the local channels that they want, and also local broadcasters get a little bit of what they want. Unfortunately, this balance sometimes creates problems when you see channel blackouts. I'm not saying that channel blackouts never happen on cable. They absolutely do happen on cable with some regularity, but you don't notice them as much because they don't tend to happen on a national basis. Yes, your cable company is probably a national one. It's probably, Comcast or Spectrum Xfinity or something like that. But on a local city-by-city basis, you don't often see these blackouts really having that kind of impact because the contracts are more often negotiated on a city-by-city basis. It makes sense there because, you have different cities that have different profiles, different numbers of people subscribing, and the very idea of, who watches what is going to be very different from place to place. When it comes to even local channels, satellite TV companies have to think national. There are these companies that own well over 100 local channels, and they're negotiating all of them at the same time. And when they get blacked out, you notice, just as we saw in earlier this year, and as we're currently seeing with DirecTV's blackout of Tegna-owned channels. So it's a much bigger deal when channel blackouts happen, and it's a little bit harder to resolve. Because like I said, when it comes down to the way that the law works for cable TV, the broadcasters already have the clear upper hand, so it's a lot harder for the cable company to get into an impasse in the first place. When it comes to satellite, it's a little bit easier because both companies are coming from an equal position of strength. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm also not the kind of person who's really going to advocate for one or the other. I just try to look at the facts. And the facts are that when it comes to satellite TV, it's all very different in the legal aspect of it. And this is going to become more and more important as we see streaming continue to dominate or in the coming years. And I think it's possible that we will see pay television settle in 2024 into probably the position it's going to occupy. You know, folks, when radio was the only thing in town and then television came in, well, radio kind of settled down into a particular spot where it no longer dominated, but it was still very important. When television came in, it was also an impact to movies, and movies had to settle in and change a lot of things. When cable television came in, it changed the landscape and the way that people viewed television, and the broadcast networks no longer had a stranglehold on what was being put out there. Other channels came in as well, and eventually we found some balance there after a long period of slippage from the broadcast networks. Well, I think we're going to see that with pay television as well. So as we move into the 2024, 2025 and beyond, the way that these laws work are going to become incredibly important. And this is just yet another reason that the FCC is such an important part of the federal government today. The FCC and its precursor agencies were, just small parts of the government throughout most of the 20th century. But as pretty much everything in our modern lives gives off some sort of radio frequency, whether it's a broadcast intentional like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, or interference such as from a microwave oven, everything goes through the FCC. There is not a piece of modern technology that you have that hasn't gone through some sort of FCC certification. That's why this agency has become so important. Unfortunately, it's also become a bit of a political football because the FCC, like several other agencies of federal government, is part of the executive branch, which means that technically reports directly to the president. Congress has to confirm some of the top people in the FCC, but in the end, they are part of the executive branch. And that means that whoever is in the White House could potentially be putting people in that position to serve their own particular needs. And certainly, what you're going to find is people going into these positions who at least share some basic political ideology with the president. Well, I'm not sure that that's really the right thing for an agency that has so much to do with everything that we do in our modern lives. But, well, I guess I don't have a huge amount of ability to change that. It's just a fact. The good news is that, what we did see in 2023 is the FCC is up to a full staff of 5 commissioners and can get some work done this year and next year. Traditionally, what happens with the FCC is that if there's a change of political party in the presidency, the current FCC chair tends to step down and is then replaced by somebody of the opposing party. It's not a guarantee and it doesn't have to happen, but it generally does. At least until the end of 2024, we've got the FCC capable of doing good work. And regardless of what happens in the 2024 elections, we, I think, have seen what happens when we don't have a full set of commissioners, and I hope that Congress will be better in making sure that the right person is confirmed. Okay, I got a little bit off track here because I am trying to talk back about basics. And when it comes to basics, let's talk about the difference between seeing something on broadcast TV over an antenna and seeing it on pay television. There are generally 2 differences. The first is that you will notice a slight improvement in quality if you're looking at stuff on an over-the-air antenna. Why? Because that is the actual feed as it's coming in. Cable and satellite companies then take that feed, decompress it, and recompress it for their own systems, and this cuts down on quality somewhat. There are algorithms like the ones used by DirecTV that restore a lot of this quality, and when it comes to just kind of objective views, a lot of people can't tell the difference. But if you want the most native, most robust version of a signal, well, you're going to want to use an over-the-air TV antenna. Another thing that's really important about getting something over the air is most folks don't realize, even at this point in time, that there are up to 3/4 of the channels that are available to you with an antenna that are not available with cable and satellite. These are often called subchannels, and they are a lot of content that wouldn't necessarily make a lot of money for these companies, but they make enough money that they're put out there. It doesn't cost a whole lot to do them. These are usually what are called syndicated services that come from a national source, and they tend to be older standard definition programming, such as MeTV or Comet or something like that, or shopping channels, which tend to actually pay the local broadcaster for carriage. These subchannels are actually kind of great. And if you're like me and you've got a few gray hairs, well, more than a few, you'll enjoy watching these TV shows from your youth. There's stuff from 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into the 2000s. And it doesn't matter that it's all standard definition. That's how this stuff was produced. It was how it was intended to be seen. In fact, it was intended to be seen live with commercial breaks. And you'll probably get a little bit more of the feeling of the pace of the program if you do that. Third thing that I want to talk about when it comes to broadcasting is that you will see different commercials on a local antenna broadcast than you will on cable and satellite. This is because the cable and satellite companies are allowed by their contracts to substitute a lot of those commercials, provided that they compensate the local broadcasters for it. It's all part of the contract law. It's all perfectly legal. And in fact, the broadcasters have grown to depend on these carriage fees rather than depending on a lot of direct advertising revenue. It's more reliable, it takes less effort to get, and it's usually guaranteed for multiple years. So it's a win-win for everybody. However, any change in the carriage fee structure is a big deal, which is, again, getting back to why you see these channel blackouts, because even a tenth of a cent can make a huge difference when you're taking into account all the millions and millions of people that are going to see a particular show. Cable, satellite, and antenna, it's interesting that they deliver the same stuff, and yet they are so different in the way these things come to them. And then you get streaming. Streaming is totally different because it uses an utterly different technology. Antenna, cable, satellite, all use some variation of the basic broadcast technologies that were developed in the 20th century, where streaming is actually taking all of that content, transferring it into digital streams that then get served by a server either on demand or as part of a multicast, like, for example, the way that NFL Sunday Ticket was done by YouTube, or the way that Pluto TV works. Still, the technology is incredibly different, and it's amazing that the picture you get on, for example, Hulu's broadcast of something is going to look more or less identical to the one that you're going to see on cable or satellite. Sometimes a little better, sometimes a little worse for different reasons. But it's amazing that two different technologies can end up giving you pretty much the same thing. Anyway, that's about it for this week's podcast. I hope you enjoyed this Back to Basics tutorial, and we'll be back next week and throughout the rest of the year with all sorts of interesting content. I got a few things planned because I think that we will probably be doing kind of pre-recorded material for the last 2 weeks of the year, because I normally record on Monday, and both the Christmas holiday and the New Year holiday are on Mondays this year. Anyway, that's it. Do me a favor, like and subscribe, leave a comment anywhere you get this podcast, makes me look good to my bosses. And then do me a favor, another one, and shop at solidsignal.com for everything you need to live your best digital life. And also call Signal Connect at 888-233-7563 for anything you need when it comes to stuff that really requires a personal attention to detail. I'm talking about large installations, business stuff, cellular signal boosters. Call 888-233-7563 and they will take great care of you. Have a great week, and I will see you again next week.